So it's allergy season. And it's going to be a wonderful one because of all the rain that we've had bringing forth. Look at how bountiful nature is for us right now. And from those of you who have perhaps suffered from allergies in the past, let us join together in denying there is no allergy. Together, there is no allergy. There is only health. There is only health. There is only easy breathing. There's only easy breathing. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate that. Yes, the pollens will only do their job. They won't bother us. An atheist scientist came to God and said, "We figured out how to make a man without you." God said, "Okay, let me see you do it." So the atheist bent down to the ground and scooped up a handful of dirt. And God said, No. Get your own dirt. By the time Bobby arrived, the football game had already started. "Why are you so late?" asked his friend. "I couldn't decide between going to church and going to the football game, so I tossed a coin," said Bobby. "Well, that shouldn't have taken too long." "Well," he said, "I had to toss it 35 times. So where are we? Yes. So we're on the home stretch. Lessons in Truth. Those of you, Sue, who knew, anybody else who's new here for the first time, we've been spending some time digging into this incredible treasury called Lessons in Truth by Dr. Emily Cady. Written in the 1890s. It's the fundamental text that we in Unity use to help us create and come to that conscious realization of God within. That is the whole purpose of our being here. So we're in the second to last chapter. The second to last chapter deepens our appreciation, as each chapter does. Remember at the beginning I said each chapter is designed to build upon the previous chapter. So in the last chapter, we talked about realization, finding the secret place, the realization of spirit that is always there. Spirit's never anywhere else but here, but I'm not always aware of it. So the purpose of this work is for me and you and all of us who choose to do so to realize, that is, to make real the spirit within. And we learned last week that we do this by stopping to try to do it. We're not going to try to do it. We're just going to stop trying to find spirit and let spirit find us. Spirit's always there. And it's the effort that creates the distance. And so when we stop, let Spirit find us, amazing things will happen. So as always is the case in Lessons in Truth, chapter 11, which is called Spiritual Gifts, is chock full of valuable insights. It's like every time I look at a chapter, I say, well, I'll just summarize this and skim this. It's difficult to do, because each paragraph has something to mull over and over. But today I just want to take a look at two ideas. And it's my favorite one is the idea that what seems to have been a constant feature of my own experience with awareness of spirit is that oftentimes what seems to be a setback or even a failure is in fact a springboard into a valuable and powerful revelation that wouldn't have occurred had the failure not occurred. So I want to tell you about how this has happened for me. So I've wrestled throughout my spiritual work, and actually all of my life, with arrogance. Webster defines arrogance as an attitude of superiority manifested in an overbearing manner or in presumptuous claims or assumptions. Now, I've always possessed the preconditions for arrogance since I was born with a quick mind and wit and a pretty... Wait, there's more. And a pretty darn good intellect. So it's my experience that it's often tough for others to keep up with me. And when I was younger, I used to think that their inability to keep up with me somehow made them worse than me and me better than them. And in the first years of spiritual awakening, I did not know that arrogance is a mask, a defense, hiding insecurities and fears of failure. That if I failed to perform according to some hidden standard, of which I wasn't even aware, I would let people down, and they would then kick me off the island. I believed that somehow it was necessary, not just important, but necessary, that I always appear well-informed, articulate, self-assured, and the best in the room. I've shared with many of us here before that I date my conscious spiritual development to my first Adult Children of Alcoholics meeting 30 years ago next month. Adult Children of Alcoholics, or ACA, is an outgrowth of the original 12-step recovery program, Alcoholics Anonymous. And it is overtly a self-proclaimed spiritual program. Now, a year after I started going to ACA meetings in San Francisco, I was invited to join a closed step study group that was mastered by my therapist and another psychologist. And there were just 12 people in this group. And it had a weekly meeting. And so I started going, and I got comfortable in the group, and I thought I was doing pretty darn well. Some of my fellow ACAers in the group were dealing with some horrendous childhood traumas. And these traumas were continuing to show up in their lives and causing them unhappiness and torment. And they were willing to sit in this group and open themselves to us in the hopes that it would help them heal and get on with their lives. So I'm there after a few months. In my arrogance, I was thankful, like the Pharisee and the publican, I was thankful that whatever my own history was with alcoholic parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, that I didn't suffer any of the terrible things that I heard about in the group. And I secretly judged myself healthier than the other people in the room. Can you see what's coming? Yeah, it's all downhill from here. One day we all decided that we would have a social gathering because we enjoyed each other in group. We thought it would be fun to go out and have a dinner and enjoy each other outside of this 12-step work environment. So we found a restaurant, met for dinner, and we laughed and drank and had a good time, and I was glad for a chance to relax with the group. Now, during that evening, I made what I thought was a pretty clever joke, referring to something one of the women had shared in group, and people chuckled, and I thought no more of it until a week later when my therapist called to make sure I was planning to come to the next meeting. Well, I actually had other plans for that night, and he goes, I think you should cancel them and come to the meeting. And I said, why? He goes, well, you betrayed a group confidence at the dinner the other night, and the group wants to discuss it. When he said that, I felt sick, ashamed, frightened, and I tried to bargain my way out of it. No, he said, I think it's best that you show up and deal with this. So courage is a funny thing, isn't it? With all my heart, I did not want to go to the meeting. But I was so afraid of what people would think if I didn't show up that I believed I had no choice. That's courage. It was awful. For the first hour, everyone checked in as usual, and everything seemed normal and fine. Except for me, I was sitting there in dread and hoping that because nobody had raised the issue that perhaps it wasn't going to be raised at all. But no, finally my therapist spoke up. He stated the behavior. He said that I'd made a joke referring to a matter that had been shared with the group, who had the entirely reasonable assumption that it would be kept private in the room, and that therefore I had broken the agreement to maintain confidentiality and anonymity. I was thunderstruck. In my arrogance, I had no idea that what I thought was a rather witty and clever reference to something we all knew about was a betrayal of the commitment I had made to the group. I sat there embarrassed, guilty, and I felt with everything in me like running out of that room as fast as I could. And that turned out to just be the beginning. Everyone was invited to tell me the impact of my behavior on each of them. And then I learned it wasn't just that one incident, but that it was my glib and guarded sharing in the few months since I joined the group that was irritating everybody. They told me that they believed me to be arrogant, withholding, dishonest, and they wondered just what the heck I was doing in the group. It felt as if everybody was emptying the gunny sack on my head, saying things that they'd been holding back on, but finally letting me have it. I don't need to tell you this was very, very unpleasant. I remember sitting there with my head down, tears spilling from my eyes, my face burning. I didn't want to look at anybody. But groups being what they are, ultimately came my turn to share. So when it came around to me, I had no choice but to throw myself on the mercy of the court. I owned my behavior. I apologized for it. I admitted that I had no idea that I was holding myself aloof from the group. I begged forgiveness and asked for a second chance. And when I finished, and believe me, I'm speaking this calmly now, but it wasn't calm. It was through choking and grief and like having my throat with a fist around it. But when I finished, I received the shock of my life, and this was the first step of my spiritual liberation. The person who seemed to me to be the most blunt and angry and confronting me sat back and he said, "Now that's the Marty I've been waiting to meet." The rest of the group offered similar words of welcome, and then we moved on to whatever else that there was to discuss. I had no idea when I made myself go to that meeting because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't go, that I would have an experience of unconditional love from the group. Now, I'd like to say that shock in that moment changed everything, and perhaps it did, but not right away. I kept coming back to the meetings, but I generally sat numbly, quietly, fearful of saying anything that might cause a resumption of the group's disapproval. No one said anything. No one challenged me about my reticence. They accepted me just as I was, and they let me be. So I didn't know at the time that I was undergoing a healing. Without realizing it, I was letting go and letting God. I submitted myself to the group's love and acceptance, something with which I had had little life experience. And eventually I felt strong enough and confident enough to participate in the group much more openly, honestly, humbly. I actually came to enjoy the meetings and our work and recognized that my arrogant little quip was the door to a miraculous healing that in my heart I had been looking for but had no clue how to ask for. So I was reminded of this experience when I read these words from Dr. Katie in this chapter, Spiritual Gifts. She says, "But the going down would only mean a mighty coming up, a most glorious resurrection of God into visibility through you in His own chosen way, right here and now. The failure for the time would only mean a grand, glorious success a little later on. Do not fear failure, but call failure good, for it really is." Now, if I had heard that in the middle of this time, I would have said, no way. Do not fear failure, but call failure good, for it really is. Did not Jesus stand in utter failure to all appearances when he stood dumb before Pilate? All his cherished principles come to naught, unable to deliver himself or to demonstrate over the agonizing circumstances of his position. But had he not seemed to fail right at that point, Dr. Katie says, there never would have been the infinitely grander demonstration of the resurrection a little later on. If you have clung to one spiritual gift because you were taught that, and you begin to fail in it, believe me, It is only the seeming death, the seeming disappearance of one gift, in order that out of it may spring many new gifts, brighter, higher, fuller ones, because they are the ones that God has chosen for you. Human lives are full of seeming failures, which often bring shame, regret, self-recrimination. What's wrong with me? Why has God failed me? Why am I so spiritually inept? Why can't I learn from lessons in truth? Many of us have heard of the list of failures of our greatest president, Abraham Lincoln. Maybe you've seen the list. 1831, lost his job. Next year, defeated in a run for the Illinois state legislature. 1833, went bankrupt. 1835, his sweetheart died. 1838, was running for the Speaker of the House of the Illinois State House, lost. 1843, wanted to run for Congress, but had to take second place to someone else. 1846, finally elected to Congress. 1848, could not run for re-election because of a political deal. 1849, he sought a job in the Zachary Taylor administration, didn't get it. 1854, decided to run for U.S. Senate. The first time, lost. 1856, was nominated, or he wanted the nomination for vice president on the newly formed Republican Party ticket, lost. 1858, ran for the U.S. Senate against Stephen A. Douglas, lost. 1860, elected president, success. Now the list that I found doesn't go into the list of all the failures that occurred while he was president. He takes office, states secede, and now he's got to decide whether he's going to bring them back in by force or not. He's dealing with a nation, after the states have seceded, they still have 4 slave states in. So he's got to balance the slave states and the free states in terms of what he's going to do with respect to abolition. Of course, he's sending thousands and thousands and thousands of young Americans to their death. He's dealing with constant attempts to undermine him from his own party, not just the opposition party, but his own party, constantly trying to make sure he doesn't get renominated and reelected. His son dies during the war. He keeps appointing generals to lead battles, and they keep losing. Sometimes through incompetence, and sometimes through cowardice, and sometimes because they didn't agree with the politics of the boss, etc., etc., etc. So that list of failures, we can now look at Abraham Lincoln, and we can see that without his leadership and without his capacity to bear through all of those failures, we might not have won the Civil War. We might not have abolished slavery. We might not have created the conditions for the largest expansion and growth of wealth that the human race has ever seen, starting in the United States of America after the war. Oh yes, he was assassinated. April 14th, 1865, another seeming failure. Failure to the left of me, failure to the right of me, failure above me, failure below me. Part of our humanity. But I'd like to share a key point about failure. Where does the notion of failure come from in the first place? Are we willing to consider this is just a word, a conceptual label that's born in our intellect? And what does Dr. Katie regularly warn us against? Believing our thoughts. It's our thoughts by which we experience and reinforce. Remember what she said in the first paragraph of the book? Belief in bondage to the flesh and things of the flesh. Believing our thoughts is what the teachings of this book are designed to help us transcend and leave behind. As I was considering this, it occurred to me that the fundamental arrogance then is not the shallow and petty defenses and fears of our egos, but rather the unexamined, hidden belief that my thoughts are stronger and more valid than God. When I refuse to let go and let God, I am unwittingly making my individual self God. This is a hard teaching for many of us. It's been hard for me. There's that part of me that doesn't believe there's any God but myself. That's arrogance. Explains to me also why the first commandment is, thou shalt not put other gods before me, aka God himself. This is also why, as we have seen, Dr. Cady puts denials before affirmations. We must deny the beliefs of our earlier experiences in order to make way for the truth. We are warned about what happens when we permit our thoughts to prevail, and we still often have difficulty truly applying denials to our human thinking. That's why I said there is no allergy. I have to deny the allergies to make way for the health and the easy breathing. Clear the decks. Because without denials, affirmations will be weak and continually undermined by the intellect, which does not want to let go. But what if God sees no failure in us? What if failure is not in God's vocabulary? What if God sees only our humanity with its struggles, addictions, misinformation, and contradiction, and calls it good? Dr. Cady says, but beloved, do you not see that your highest, your first, yes, your continual thought should be to seek the abiding in Him, to seek the knowing as a living reality, not as a fine-spun theory for the mind, that He abides in you? After that, ask what you will, be it a power to heal, to cast out demons, or even greater works, and it shall be done unto you. Now, we all have our experiences of dark time and failures that have presaged surprising triumphs and resurrections. We need breakdowns to make way for the breakthroughs. Dr. Cady says it this way: your greatest work will be done in your own God-appointed channel. If you will let Spirit possess you wholly, if you will have the highest will done in you and through you continually, you will be quickly moved by it out of your present limitations, including belief and failure, which a half success always indicates, into a manifestation as much fuller and more perfect and beautiful as is the new grain than the old seed, which had to fall into the ground and die. Old ways must die. Failure is only the death of the old, that there may be the hundredfold following. If there comes to you a time when you do not demonstrate over sickness as you did at first, do not think that you need to lean on others entirely. It is beautiful and good for another to heal you bodily by calling forth universal life through you. But right here, there is something higher and better for you. So failure, Dr. Cady is telling us, is part of being human. It's only something human beings believe in. God does not believe in failure. There's no such thing to God. And when we throw ourselves upon the mercy of God, when we let go and let God, no matter what's going on, we will experience something that our human minds cannot conceptualize or even believe in. So I'd like us, rather than speak an affirmation of this, I'd like us to sing an affirmation if you're up for it. If you'd be willing to turn to number 203. This is the one that the The refrain is leaning on the everlasting arms. It's called What a Fellowship. Now, I'd like us to consider that the fellowship that we're being asked to sing about here is the fellowship with God within us. What a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessedness, what a peace is mine, leaning on the everlasting arms. Sharon, would you? We can stay seated for this, unless you want to stand. It's up to us. Safe and secure from all alarms when I lean on the everlasting arms of God. Within, it's always there. The other point in the chapter that I thought was worth taking a look at is a very sweet one, and that's that each of us has his or her own special way of realizing Spirit. We need never compare ourselves to anyone else. Our own way is unique, special. God-designed way to bring us and God delight and fulfillment. Dr. Katie says, to be the greatest success, you do not want my gift, nor do I want yours. Each wants his own, such as will fit his size and shape, his capacity and desires, such as not the human mind of us, but the highest in us shall choose. Seek to be filled with Spirit, to have the reality of things incarnated in larger degree in your consciousness. Spirit will reveal to your understanding your own specific gift or manner of God's desired manifestation through you. So let us not desert our own work, our own God within us, to gaze or pattern after our neighbor. Let us not seek to make his gift ours. Let us not criticize his failure, there's that word again, to manifest any specific gift. Whatever he fails, quote unquote, give thanks to God that God is leading him up to a higher place, where there can be a fuller and more complete manifestation of the divine presence within him. So next week, come back. We will have the opportunity to explore the spiritual gift of individual realization, because we're starting an occasional series of lessons I'm calling Wisdom of the Congregation. And we will hear from 3 of our members who have struggled with physical challenges and have discovered healing in ways that defy the logical mind. We will hear from congregational members who have let God into their bodies to do the healing. And they have let God be God in their own unique way of challenging healing energies and changing their lives. So please come next week to hear from some of our members about this very special spiritual gift that each has brought to her own healing so that we may participate in that healing. So Dr. Katie closes the chapter with this quote from Ephesians, and where she says, "I beseech you to walk worthily of the calling wherewith you were called, with all the lowliness and meekness, with long suffering, forbearing one another in love, giving diligence to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace." So higher power, divine presence, Mother, Father, God, we thank you for our failures. We know that even in our despair and self-condemnation, you are there, offering us the possibility of healing and rising up, demanding nothing of us. You love us as we are, warts, failures, and all. And for this, we are ever grateful. Thank you, God. Amen.
Thank you.